To talk Oklahoma Sooners with you, Garen Emig and Eric Bailey from the Tulsa World. We were just about to jump into a previously not well. No, that makes it sound like we're organized. Eric, we aren't. I was about to say previously scheduled format for the show. Are you kidding me? This is a lot more fun just to go off the cuff, but we really go off the cuff today because just as we were sitting down to record, news broke that the college football playoff has decided to officially put expansion on hold through the 2025 season. That's 4 more years of 4 teams only, after all of the talk about expanding to 12 and all of the work that was done by a 4-man subcommittee, including Bob Bowlesby, the Big 12 commissioner, right? Remember that from last summer before the world ended and went over the SEC upheaval and OU in Texas and all that stuff. So, Eric, assuming that our friend Ralph Russo's reporting, I think he and Nicole Auerbach of The Athletic broke through sources the story that the playoff is standing pat. Assuming the playoff really is standing pat, this goes back to Oklahoma and its situation regarding its future. True or false? Whereas everyone was ready to run to the SEC as soon as possible, is it true or false that it might be better to tap the brakes a little bit?
I think so. I mean, from a competitive standpoint, if you're Oklahoma, the path to the college football playoff is much easier through the Big 12. I mean, it's been proven. They've gone 2015, 2017, 2018, 2019. They've been to the playoff. 2020. It's one of those things where I think the path is easier through the Big 12, but then you still look at the financial ramifications, the prestige, preparing for the SEC. There's been talk, a lot of people, neither school officially say they'd love to be in the SEC before 2025. I think they would, but now it kind of makes you step back and look at this and think, is the path from a competitive standpoint easier to the college football playoff through the Big 12 than the SEC? I think so. I think it is for Oklahoma. And now I'm not saying that Oklahoma can't compete with the Alabama and the Georgias of the world. We're just looking at the easier path. And I think it is through the Big 12. So it's going to be interesting to see if Oklahoma, Texas is going to make that really quick jump based on the college football playoff news, or if they're going to try to get out of the contract before 2025. That's the key. And Garen, you and I talked about this before we started. It's just so interesting when this came out with the 14 playoff. It's going to last the duration of the 12-year contract. I never thought that would happen. I never thought when they announced the college football playoff and it was a 12-year deal at 4 teams, I never thought that it would last 12 years. But after today's news, it looks like it's going to last a dozen years, which really surprises me. Well,
it shouldn't. And I've written this 2 or 3 different ways, even in the last year, Eric, that what it reminds me of? Remember when Major League Baseball, gosh, this dates me now, 25 years ago, when they cut with tradition and said, you know what, let's do more than 4 teams. You play 162 games and you only have back then there were just 4 divisions. You only have the 4 division winners playing each other. And I remember the traditionalists and some of the managers and the old baseball guard, like, oh no, we can't do that, right? It'll ruin all that we love about the game. We've got a great product and we don't want to screw up a good thing. And without thinking that maybe more of a good thing is a good thing. And that's where I am on the playoff. It's not just that I'm tired of Alabama and Clemson and Ohio State and even Oklahoma. And I get a sense that the sporting public is tired of the same 4 to 6 teams rotating spots in a 4-team playoff. You can make that argument, and I have in the world, but it's all over me that people think that the reason not to progress is that we've got a good thing, that there won't be as much meaning or attention on the regular season. It'll water down what adding even 8 more teams will water down the playoffs. When it seems obvious to just about anyone with any sense that the opposite is true. It gets more fan bases hooked into the process, right? Because it opens it up is simply what you're doing. Besides the fact that it also opens you up to a financial boom. And the media analysts who know a lot more about that than I do in terms of specifics have done the research to show how many millions of dollars you're leaving on the table via network contracts by not expanding. And so I'm literally, I'm at a loss for why this hasn't happened, and especially after the work that Bowlesby and those guys did to put together a sound, rational 12-team format. I know all of the issues that are pervading over college football: NIL, transfer portal madness, coaching contract madness, uncertainty with media outlets and contracts. I get all that, the realignment. That's still no excuse. None of it is an excuse just to do the progressive thing here. And now I'll shut up and let you go.
Well, why limit the fun, right? Is that, I mean,
yeah.
You look at all the major sports, look at baseball and the changes you talked about the playoff structure, the designated hitter, the traditionalists, they hate the DH, but look where that's gone. Look at the NBA, how, what they're doing now and how they're, it's the playoffs. They went from the first round playoff used to be a best of 5. Now it's best of 7. And it was a change. And then look at football. They added a week of football this year, 17 games now. And the playoff structure has changed in the NFL too. So things can change. And just because, change may be different, but change can't be bad. And, I would love to see an 8 or a 12-team playoff. I would love to see that. I'd love to see the group of 5 get an opportunity. We saw Cincinnati break through. And I'd like to see more competitive games. When we go to the semifinal format with 4 teams, these semifinal games have been blowouts. They haven't been interesting at all. I just think if you add another hurdle, I think the games get more competitive. And I think the fans, I mean, can you tell me that a quarterfinal game, if you go to 8, a quarterfinal game is going to draw so much attention. Those 4 games are going to be well watched because they're going to be competitive, really good teams. There's a way, and it's just frustrating because I really think that it should expand beyond 4. I mean, you think about it, it's been 8 years now. It'd be nice just to see the change.
Well, there literally was a way, and the fact that subcommittee put forth that 12-team way, and for it to have not been almost rubber stamped is just beyond me. Specific though, getting back on track to the Sooners, and it's my fault for the diatribe, but that I tend to agree that. I mean, I haven't heard him say it. I'm not reporting it, but this is simple 2 and 2, right? 2 and 2 stuff. That one of the reasons that it became as easy for Oklahoma to make the call to realign with the SEC last summer was that 12-team playoff was on the table then, right? And in fact, it seemed like that's where we were headed. Castiglio's own commissioner was involved in that subcommittee, Bob Bowlesby. The SEC commissioner was involved in that, his future commissioner. So he had to think that part of the competitive aspect to this move was going to open up for the Sooners. If it was going to be harder for them to make a playoff from the SEC, a 4-team playoff, well, it suddenly looked a lot more feasible with 12, with that at some point. And maybe it was going to time out with OU's official move to the SEC. And now you're going to at least one season just because of even if they run out the grant of rights through the Big 12, Eric, that last season, you're going to have to run through the SEC to make a 4-teamer. And I can't believe that's we'll see what kind of shape the program is in it by that time. We'll see, right, what Brent Venables does with the Sooners between now and then. Who's to say? But as it stands right now, that looks more like that feels like sort of banging your head against the wall.
Exactly, it does. And you're right. And it comes down to preparing for this transition. I mean, that's what Brent Venables, going back to Oklahoma football, that's what Brent Venables, that's his job. He's got to get this team ready to make that change to the SEC. College football playoff is part of the discussion too now. So I'm really interested to, maybe that's a question we ask Brent when we get a chance to talk to him again is, just his thoughts on the college football playoff. Now that he's at a new school, he was at a former school that, really had no problem going through the ACC and getting to the playoff. What's his thoughts in the Big 12 and getting to the playoff in a 4-team structure, and how much do things change when they do go to the SEC? I think that's something we really need to ask Venables.
Yeah, well, I think the understanding is that the new staff, not just Brent, but Jeff Lebby coming from Ole Miss, some of the other, Jay Valai, who was at Alabama, the cornerbacks coach, right? They're putting not just a Clemson imprint sort of on the program, but an SEC one as well. And so, and the other thing is, Eric, is that just because there's been so much turmoil with regard to the transition from Riley and Grinch and that group to Brent and Ted Roof and Levy and this group, the need to stabilize, right? That's the word that we've used ever since Riley went to USC several weeks ago. The need to stabilize is almost an excuse for OU to say, you know what, maybe we stay with what we know a little longer than we plan to, right? Regarding moving to the SEC, regardless of any playoff structure. We know the playbook on how to succeed in the Big 12. Maybe we stick to that a little bit until we get the transition toward a more SEC-centric program in place with the new coaching staff.
That's a great point because, it's only not knowing the playoff, it's the recruiting aspect too. You look at when Lincoln Riley was here, when everyone thought Lincoln Riley would be here through the SEC change, recruiting was at an all-time high. I mean, he was getting the quality 5-star recruits to come to Oklahoma. Riley's left. Brent Venables is going to have to rebuild that, and he did a great job this past. I mean, I'm not taking anything away from what he did this past class because he was outstanding, number 8 in the country. But that would give Brent Venables a little more time to build that recruiting foundation. I think Oklahoma is going to be really good in recruiting in the next couple of years, but once you get those recruits on campus, you're right. It takes time for them to develop and learn the system and play and be successful. And maybe this does allow Oklahoma to step back and say, okay, let's get ready for this move. Maybe it'll take a couple more years to prepare for that move. So there's so many different ways you can go through this conversation. Right. And I'm sure Brent Venables and Joe Castiglione and everyone inside the OU Athletics department is trying to figure out, okay, what's the game plan? What's the blueprint? And it's going to be interesting to see in the next, not this year, but the years to come.
It's funny how things change because the narrative does. When we sort of came to grips with what the Sooners and Texas were doing, right, and leaving the Big 12, and we saw the money figures that were thrown out again by the market analysts in terms of what kind of a windfall it could be. Dude, if you had asked me last August when the Sooners were going to camp whether OU would be in the SEC next year or at the end of the grant of rights, I would have said next year, because I figured that by the base had been worked up into the fan base, right, the donor base had been worked up into such a lather by the prospect of playing Alabama, LSU, Georgia, Florida, instead of Kansas, Texas Tech, you know what I mean? West Virginia, that kind of thing. I mean, this was multi-layer. There were thousands of layers to this. It wasn't just competitive. Most of it was financial. But I mean, the layers seeped down into a bunch of different things that had to be decided. But the overall tenor from last August was full speed ahead, right? Let the lawyers do their work to get out of whatever they need to do in terms of the grant of rights, absorb the exit fees, but get the program to where the people, your people, want to be. I guess outside of the head football coach, we've come to learn. Right, but full speed ahead, get this done, and it's amazing how about a half year later, it's like get this done ? Not exclamation point.
Yeah, I mean, and then you look at the money. It's funny you mean about the financials. It was reported last week the SEC member schools averaged $55 million almost in revenue. Those are some big figures for schools too. And, if you're Joe Castiglione, that's not lost on you either, how much money these SEC schools make. I mean, the SEC, that's just, I think their total revenue was $833 million. You're closing in on $1 billion revenue. It's money that's involved in the SEC and in everything in college athletics.
Well, and a real quick sidebar to that. Did you see the reports that came out this week about a potential $1 billion Big Ten media rights package?
Yeah.
And if you're Oklahoma and you see that on top of the revenue distribution in the SEC and you're trying to maintain, right? You're trying to stay on equal footing, especially with regard to football, but across the board. Yeah, that steers you probably to make decisions more than what a playoff committee does or does not decide. Competitively, it's not ideal to have to work your way through Alabama and Georgia right now to get to a 4-team playoff. It just doesn't.
Exactly. Yeah, going back to the how we started this, you're right. I mean, yeah, the path is a lot easier through the Big 12. So we'll see what happens.
Wow. All right. So we have that. Staff news is on hold regarding the Sooner football program, unless someone snuck in through a back door that I wasn't aware of. Right? Players on hold, transfer wise.
It's a quiet time. Signing day, that's for a beat writer. End of February is a quiet time because it's a dead period. The coaches really get a little bit of time off. I know at Oklahoma they're probably not taking time off because they got to learn this playbook. They got to get it ready for an install. Chip Viney, how about him? Chip Viney moving on. He's been with part of the program for, how many years, Garen? I mean, he's been he's been a
feels like a decade. Guy.
Yeah, he's been behind the scenes and sent a really nice social media tweet before leaving for San Jose State, just thanking Oklahoma for all the opportunities and what they did to him. And, when I get a chance to talk to some of these recruits, they mentioned Chip Viney. They say he was such a big part of their recruitment too, behind the scenes. So good luck to him. I think that is just it's neat. He just, guys like that, when you see guys like that have just really invested in the Oklahoma program, as a fan, as a coach, you're probably really glad to see them move on and with their life and be thankful for what and you're almost like a parent, I guess, if you're an Oklahoma fan, because you see them move on and you hope that, whatever happens, just good things happen for that person.
Viney's a guy that has been sort of, as you put it well, a behind the scenes guy for a number of years at OU, worked mostly technically on the defensive side of the ball, dating back to when Bob Stoops was the head coach as well. And I think he's come up in conversations we've had with both players and coaches through the years as watch his trajectory. Yeah. Once he makes his way, whether it's in Norman or elsewhere, just watch him become a star in the business. So yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. Viney has done some important work behind the scenes for a number of years and will be followed by both players and fans, both players and coaches of that program. We're getting closer to March, Eric. We really ought to load up on basketball as OU continues its pursuit of an NCAA tournament berth. I think the tone was pretty positive when you and I visited a week ago. And then came a close loss in Lawrence, which didn't exactly reflect poorly on the Sooners. But then came another close loss, overtime loss at home to Texas. They're playing, the best teams the Big 12 has to offer, and yet they're not winning them. They're competitive, but they're not pulling through. And I think this is the time of year you start to not so much focus on credit them for being competitive, but worry about them for not pulling through.
Exactly. It's one thing. It's a bittersweet time if you're an Oklahoma fan because you're excited about how they are playing and how close they're coming to beating the Texas, the Kansas of the world. And it's coming, winning in Lawrence. They haven't done that since '93, and they had a chance. They had an opportunity to win. They had the ball in a two-point loss in the final seconds. So I think, Porter Moser, he's excited about what they're doing, but he knows they need to win. And it's just so important for them. They've been on the bubble. I think they're sliding off the bubble now because they do have a lot of quality wins as well, but they have a lot of close losses. They really need to win some of these tight games, and they're going to have to finish strong. That's the key. Starting at Iowa State on Saturday, which, it's always been hard to win at Iowa State for the Sooners program. So I think that's a big key. But they do have winnable games left on the schedule. They do go to Tech, which will be tough, but they got OSU, Kansas State still on the schedule. There's winnable games, but they're going to have to finish strong and probably win a game in the Big 12 tournament. And that Big 12 tournament's not going to be easy. All those four semi or quarterfinal games are all going to be drag out fights. So it's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, the problem is OU is good enough to compete. I don't know if they're good enough again to overcome. And they're not they might not be playing Kansas and Texas down the stretch any longer. But I didn't hear a tap in just now. I mean, Iowa State has sort of gone the wrong direction really since mid-January. But I'm not sure I expect the Sooners to win in Ames. I just don't know if I can say that. I wouldn't. I'm not sure that when they host Bedlam a week from tomorrow, that's going to work out in their favor, right? Because it didn't in Stillwater at all.
Yeah.
So
it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. And the funny thing is the news this week, Oklahoma is struggling on the basketball court. Porter Moser made off the court news by announcing that he's all in, definitely that the school needs a new basketball arena. And this is something we talked about in 2017, 2018. They talked about an off-campus arena in North Norman, and it kind of got tabled, kind of got voted down. And now the county commission looks like they're ready to start this talk up again. And this is something that's interesting, the timing. Porter Moser said that, Lloyd Noble Center is 50 years old. He said some schools have built 2 new arenas in that time. So he said that that school definitely needs an arena. I just don't know what directions this is going to go. I'm really curious to see where this plays out and how it goes.
I'm not arguing against the fact that the Lloyd Noble Center is a little bit antiquated, I guess, but it's not a dump. Number one, the problem is not the building. And this is like the cut and paste deal. I've said it or written it over the years as a beat writer and then as a columnist. It's not the building, it's the atmosphere in the building. And I think that translates to a new off-campus arena for a year. And then if Porter Moser doesn't have a team that's Final Four caliber, and it takes something like that to get fans interested in OU basketball, if he doesn't have a team with Buddy Hield or Blake Griffin on it or Trae Young, the crowds ain't going to be, I'm just telling you, they're not going to be any different. This has been a generational issue with Oklahoma basketball that Lloyd Noble becomes a scapegoat for. Okay. I think that I just want that on the record before people decide to pay whatever they pay in taxes to get, again, you want to do it. Great. Go for it. You want to campaign for it. If you're Porter Moser, I don't blame him a bit. Right. Yeah. Because it's new and it's what's new and shiny and all tricked up it makes the coach's job easier and to get the fan base excited. And it will get them excited for a while. But OU basketball is, I hate saying this because everyone says it, but it literally in this case is what it is. And in this case, it is what it has been for years.
Yeah.
When it comes to fan connection.
And Porter Moser, you mentioned bringing in the superstars, and that's one thing Porter Moser does understand, that he has to put a winning product on the floor. And he said that. He came right out and said that it's his job to go out there and win basketball games and make fans want to come to games. So he understands the challenge, not only of the funding, but also, more importantly for him, putting a winning product on the floor. I think it's good that he grasped that. He doesn't feel entitled to a new arena because he's the new coach at Oklahoma. He knows he has to earn that as well.
All right, real quick, baseball opening day in Dallas or at the Rangers
Auburn, playing Auburn. Jake Bennett, Bigsby High School. I feel bad for him when you look at his career. He started off the 2020 season 3-0 with a 0.75 ERA. Outstanding start on an outstanding staff. That team was set to go to Omaha. I mean, we look at it, that team was set, and then COVID cut everything. And then Jake came back next year, kind of struggled, didn't have the opportunity to go through summer workouts in Cape Cod because of COVID. Came back last spring, struggled a little bit, had an ERA over 6. But Skip Johnson hasn't lost faith in the left-hander. And Jake went to the Cape Cod League, had some success, worked on things, and now, lo and behold, he's the opening day starter for Oklahoma baseball. So it's neat seeing a local young man out of Bixby go and get to where he's at now and ready for the ball in his hand on Friday nights. Also, he credited George Frazier, the Tolson.
Okay.
He said during that COVID year, he worked with George Frazier too. George Frazier kind of fine-tuned some things too. So I thought that was interesting as well.
Well, speaking of pitchers, real quick, as much as the focus on softball, on OU softball is on Jocelyn Allen's pursuit of the all-time NCAA home run record. How about the freshman hurler, Jordy Ball against UCLA last week?
It's
officially arriving.
4-1, 14 strikeouts against the Bruins. I mean, and just really amazing game. And it tells you a lot. Patty Gasco in the preseason, she talked about how good a pitcher she was, and now she's proving it. And the thing you like to see if you're an Oklahoma fan is, man, she is demonstrative on the mound. She's not a shy freshman by any means. She's out there and she's aggressive. She attacks batters. She celebrates strikeouts, a little fist pump, and here's a young lady that's gonna make waves in college softball, and it's gonna be fun to watch her growth and her progression. And boy, that just makes that dominant Oklahoma team even more dominant when you have someone like her in the circle.
So they have number one protected well, right, through 1 week of the season. Didn't drop any games. out in their season opening event, and they're in Houston this weekend.
They're in Houston this weekend. Yeah, scored 40 runs, gave up one unearned run. That's fine for a perfect game in one game. Yeah, they're really setting their foundation. And speaking of Jocelyn Alo, she's at 90 now, needs 5 home runs to beat Lauren Chamberlain's NCAA record. And so that'll be the next thing we're going to really be watching closely, is that home run watch for Jocelyn Alo.
You said you might get a chance to speak with Chamberlain next week about that with folks at OU's assistants. So that might be interesting perspective. So
Definitely.
All right. So we'll keep track of it as best we can. A lot of things happening. It's OU sports. It's the case no matter what time of year it is, football, basketball, spring sports, and otherwise. Eric's on top of it as the beat writer. I'll chime in as a columnist now again, and you can catch our podcast every week on TulsaWorld.com, the video version via Google, Spotify, and Apple. Audio-wise, please continue to download the product throughout the weeks, and we will continue to crank it out, whether from a Sooners, Oklahoma State Cowboys, or Tulsa Golden Hurricane perspective. We'll talk to you next week.
For more information, you can visit TulsaWorld.com.